Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to link some of the bizarre responses that Boris Johnson gave during the final pre-Easter Prime Minister's questions with the statement at the recent Tory party conference that they were about to go into campaign mode for the next election, even though the election is not going to be anytime soon, was the answer to why Johnson was rambling about nothing, even by his standards, a warm-up for his campaign patter. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I remarked in my review of PMQs this week that even for him, Boris Johnson was producing responses that had nothing at all to do with the question. It's not just that he was not answering the question. That has been a feature of his premiership. It was that he was answering completely different questions. And even then he was still lying. Even when he made up his own questions, he still lied about the answer. And this week was particularly jarring, for me anyway. Could the Prime Minister explain what he will do about the rising cost of energy? Watermelons! What? People are fascinated by hedgehogs. Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister quite well? I like cake. Now, Boris Johnson did not actually talk about, well, watermelons, hedgehogs or cake, but he may as well have done. His actual responses bore about as much relevance to the question. Like, if you were to get a transcript of the PMQ session of Hansard, and you cut up the questions and you cut up the responses and asked someone to match them up, they'd never do it in a million years. It was completely disjointed. But the thing that makes it bizarre is not so much that the Prime Minister was answering his own made-up questions, but that he was doing it in the middle of a parliament. Like, if we were about to kick off a general election campaign, it would actually make more sense. I don't mean the responses would make more sense. The responses never make sense at such a time. But the disjointed nature of the responses. Like, in a political campaign, you work with your strategists, you identify a limited number of messages. Let's be honest, for all the talk of politicians saying that the voters aren't stupid, the voters are bloody stupid. You know, at this point, I refer you to the American philosopher George Carlin. Think of how stupid the average person is, and then realise that half of them are stupider than that. Then you add into that that most people, whether stupid or not, could be perfectly intelligent, but they get their political information from the mainstream media. The mainstream media is largely privately owned by the power behind the throne of the Conservative Party, and some others face a great deal of control by the Conservative government, such as the BBC. So even intelligent people do not have the facts at their disposal. Doesn't matter how clever you are, if you haven't got the facts, what decisions you're going to make is not going to be the right ones. You know, many have the Conservatives' truth as they would like people to see it. So you cannot have a complex debate with tens of millions of voters, some of whom are stupid. They are stupid. Some of whom are not stupid, but they don't have the facts at their disposal. So what you need is a small number of simple messages. The winner of a general election always focuses in a very disciplined way on a small number of core messages. But of course, during a campaign, journalists will want to ask you questions about a whole range of things. The disciplined politician does not let them. They have their messages and they do not want their messages lost in a sea of other messages. So during a big campaign, you often have to ignore the question and answer your own question. Or if that won't work, you reinterpret the question into your own words. You know, if your two key messages are hedgehogs and cake, then that will be your response to every question. Could you tell me why you think your government seems to have presided over a historic rise in the cost of living? Where do you think you went wrong? That's a very good question. But I think the real question that voters are interested in is how they can get more hedgehogs and cake. But what about the cost of living? Well, the real issue here is the public's fascination with hedgehogs and their desire for cake. And only my party will provide up-to-date information on where hedgehogs may be found and provide the market conditions needed for the acquisition of cake. The opposition will do nothing like that. They hate hedgehogs and they hate cake. And they'll do that forever. No matter how much the interviewer insists on their question, the politician will happily keep answering their own question without a hint that they're doing nothing of the sort. This is what makes Boris Johnson such an effective campaigner. He can allow his brain to twist itself in knots quite easily, where more grounded people would struggle to push through the cognitive dissonance. So often when you hear Tory ministers parroting the latest line from Downing Street, you can see the struggle in their face and their speech as they and their way through it because they can't follow the illogical contortions. It's like they're trying to memorise a script for a play that's written in a foreign language. Johnson spouts this rubbish without pause because he lives in a fantasy world. But answering your own questions is typical of a political campaign. That's how it works, how it's always worked, and it's not just Boris Johnson that's done it. But Boris Johnson keeps doing it between campaigns as well. This is where politics stops being normal. There is no period when he gets serious about the job of governing. All right, we've won the election now. Get on with the job of governing. Then at the next election campaign, go back into campaigning mode. It's always the campaign. It's always the hedgehogs and cakes for him. Listening to Johnson at PMQs this week, I had flashbacks to my early political education via Yes Minister. You have something you want to say, you ignore the question. But don't be seen to be ignoring the question, you reframe it. If they persist with the question, you say something like, well, the voters aren't really interested in that. What I hear on the doorstep is concern over hedgehogs and cake. The Tories and their stooges in the media, for example, talk about Westminster bubble stories. It's their code to mean, I don't want to talk about that. I'm going to claim that ordinary people aren't interested either. In PMQs this week, he turned a lot of responses into attacks on Labour. Nothing wrong with that in itself, of course, it's the political crucible, but he wasn't defending a government position by ridiculing the Labour position on the same issue. He was just coming up with random attacks. Some of them were made up. Some of them related to policies that Labour had decades ago, and even then he wasn't entirely clear about what he thought was wrong with them. In other words, there was no attempt to answer the question or even just dodge the question. He took the opportunity to just read out a litany of imagined grievances about the Labour Party. Now we do have a local election campaign coming up. Obviously, he could just have been trying to throw some mudslinging in before that. After all, by the time we get to the next PMQs, it'll be April the 20th, only a couple more weeks before the elections, and some may already have cast postal votes, I suppose. Certainly the local elections could be a big deal for him. I've already said recently, I don't expect the local elections to be a massive headache for Boris Johnson. I think the Stormont elections might be more of an issue, but I don't see any evidence that Tory losses will be so bad as to be publicly damaging to his reputation. Obviously, we never know. People can be funny bunnies in a local election. We also don't get the accurate polling that you do during the general election. Frankly, anyone still thinking that the Conservatives are a credible prospect for government after Partygate and the out-of-control rate of COVID infections and cost of living are not going to be snapped out of their delusions by a bad set of local election results. And a bad set of local election results is not uncommon for the party in government. It'd be interesting to see if he carries on responding in this way after this year's elections though. Is he just doing this because of the local elections? Or is he now on his 2-year campaign and that's how he's going to be for good? When it was announced at the Tory conference recently that they were going to kick off a 2-year general election campaign from this May, did they mean it? If so, then Boris Johnson will probably be in full campaign mode for the duration. He's much happier in campaign mode anyway. But if so, then it means that Prime Minister's questions will just become a complete farce if the opposition do not rise to the occasion. It was never really fit for purpose with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister anyway. He feels free not only to completely avoid answering the question, any Prime Minister will want to do that, but blatantly lying as well. But if every response is just going to be getting a campaign message out, then it will be pointless. And I wonder if, say, Keir Starmer would not be better adopting the same line if so. I don't think he will. I think it's fairly evident that he's not one for the rabble-rousing fire and brimstone oratory. It's a bit of a shame because I do think that something like that could actually work against Johnson. These people just don't seem to exist in mainstream politics these days, though. I can't actually think of anyone in Labour that would do it. It's like they've forgotten the phrase, nobody can steal your thunder when you are the storm. Unfortunately, they haven't got a storm. Because no matter how insightful the questions are from not just Starmer, but any opposition leader or indeed backbench MP, if Johnson just stands up, replies hedgehogs and cake, nothing is done to compel him to behave, then it's all in vain. Still, it might be a good test of Labour's strategies. If Johnson is going to change tack a bit in future PMQs, will Labour adapt? But anyway, ramble over. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.